Welcome to episode 13 of A Day with Dre. We've got an interesting one to go over today. It's about this phenomenon happening all over the world, and that's the incel movement. Not new, but certainly becoming more and more relevant each day. But before we get into talking about what an incel is and this movement happening, make sure you subscribe to A Day with Dre podcasts. Again, I'm available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Also, there's an Instagram page, TikTok, YouTube Shorts. Pretty much anywhere you take in your media, you'll find A Day with Dre. Liking and subscribing, leaving comments is the easiest way to support this podcast. And, leaving comments on things you agree with, disagree with, even ideas for episodes, anything helps. So all of that feedback is greatly appreciated. Now, let's get into it. So let's talk about incels. What is an incel? Okay. An incel it's a made up word. It was actually coined by a woman back in the 90s, and it means involuntarily celibate, meaning celibate means you don't have sexual relationships. And incels are involuntarily celibate, meaning they're not choosing their celibacy, but it's forced onto them, really. But how is that relevant in today's digital age? When you hear incel, you don't think of a woman, really. You're probably thinking of a man, right? And incels are a group of men by today's, digital standard that are unable to find romantic or sexual partners, but they want to. Right? That's why it's involuntarily celibate. And this leads to frustration, resentment, and anger towards women in today's current society. These men think that they're unjustly being denied relationships, and this leads to some extremist behavior. And lately it's been grouped in with a lot of, homophobia, sexism, racism. It's kind of run into some very extremist opinions that are way far right in ideology, and it's becoming more and more prevalent with young people. I read that young men today, that's the highest rate of virgins that have been recorded in many decades, and of course that in line with people in incel ideology. So it's almost like its own epidemic happening across the world, but especially in Western society. So really, before we dive into this, we are going to talk about some sensitive things that have happened with this community. So I guess that's my trigger warning, is that this does include some things that can be triggering because the incel community has committed some atrocities. So they have affected people very negatively. So whether that's been you directly or someone you know directly, that's the trigger warning for what we'll get into. So really, the core beliefs and terminology that this unique community uses. So the incel community right now is really big on the internet. And this, of course, with the internet, the younger you are, the more the internet really dominates your view on the world. And that shift towards kind of the internet controlling your view of the world and controlling all aspects of your social life has allowed this group of people that maybe traditionally would have had to talk to people in person and form relationships that way. People have become a lot more exclusive and picky about the people that they want to talk to. And the internet also allows you to be able to reach out to a lot more people at once. So basically, it seems like the internet's allowed these small groups of people that maybe would have been kind of isolated to find other groups of people that also feel isolated. And these isolated communities, especially from the incel standpoint, these groups of people that don't necessarily get to communicate with women in the way that they want to, find each other and almost radicalize each other. So the terminology used in these communities are very interesting because they almost, although they're the ones kind of living in an altered reality, they like to say that people like me are living in an altered reality, and they use the Matrix. And if you haven't seen the Matrix, it's an older movie. It's a movie series, but there's basically you're in an online world, but the people that are in the Matrix don't realize they're in the Matrix. So one of the things that happens is in the Matrix, Neo, the protagonist, the main character, he's given the option of a blue pill and a red pill. So the red pill it'll allow him to see outside of the Matrix. He'll be able to understand that the Matrix is an illusion and he'll be able to see outside of it. But the blue pill will allow him to return to only experiencing that illusion. So even though you're experiencing an illusion, it might be happy whereas the red pill allows you to see the world for what it is, the actual reality. And from an incel standpoint, they say the red pills are embracing the idea that your unhappiness as a man and your lack of sexual success as a man is the fault of women and the growing strength of the feminist movement. And the men that don't accept this reality are the blue-pilled people. And then on the more extremist end, there's also the black-pilled people. And the black-pilled people are, these are incels that accept that fighting against the feminist system, fighting against this wave of feminism it's futile. So you're either encouraged to go commit suicide or go be a hero. And the way they spell hero is really interesting because when they spell a hero, they make the E and the R capital. And that's referencing Elliot Rodgers, who back in 2014 went on a killing spree as an act of misogynistic terrorism, specifically target women or happy couples because he himself could not achieve that. So again, just encouraging violence against the group of people that they feel like are the reasons that they aren't able to find any type of romantic happiness. So there's really one of the core beliefs is like entitlement, right? These people feel like they just are entitled to having happy relationships with women. And other people that feel like that really, they find each other and then they amplify these views to the point where they make violence against women or people that are in happy relationships, or not even happy relationships, people that are just in relationships. They make violence against those people acceptable because they're not experiencing something that they feel like they're entitled to. So it's almost like if I can't enjoy this, no one will enjoy this, and they'll go down guns blazing. The language that these communities use, it's kind of dehumanizing women to just, objects, because they just feel like they're able to get what they want out of these people. And it just makes them almost a commodity or a property. The psychology behind this, again, this idea that there's this attack that feminism is eliminating these men's ability to successfully court women, but they're the ones that say that if you don't believe that, you're living in the false universe. But they believe in this conspiracy against feminism and men in general. So it's kind of interesting, the psychology around that. But yeah, generally speaking, incels believe that there's a war on men. And there is a war on things that people consider manly behavior, but that's really the war on toxic masculinity, right? That war is not on being a man itself. And this isn't the time for me to really go into what toxic masculinity means, but in general, it's just there's just restrictive and harmful social expectations that are placed on you just for being a man. So it's not that masculinity is bad, but there's toxic masculinity, and that means that things such as like dominance, aggression, suppressing your emotions. You don't feel emotions as a man. You reject anything that's considered feminine, and that leads to harmful behavior, self-behaviors, harmful behaviors to other people, and really just tanks your mental health when you live by those rules. And I think feminism and kill the patriarchy is really trying to get away from those things, but it's not trying to get away from being a man, if that makes sense. But people conflate the two, and they take, empowering women and getting rid of the patriarchy, they take that as just attacking men. And so that's where this idea of the war on men comes from. But as we've become a more and more online culture, one of the issues is that social media and online dating has really changed how people interact with each other. Because once upon a time, you had to go meet someone. You had to run into someone at the gym. You had to go to class with someone. Now people can find people that they want to date from across the country through an app by swiping on something. And incels believe that this has allowed the top 20% of men to really hoard 80% of women. Where these numbers come from is really a mystery, to be honest with you, because there's just no evidence for that. But then they believe the rest of the 80% of men get the bottom 20% of women. And that's the logic that they're using. I think if you're out in the world interacting with people, you realize that that's just hearsay. That's not remotely true. And also, when you grade people like a bell curve, it's just setting you up for failure. anyways. But the idea is, they say that unless you're in that top 20% of men physically or top 20% of men from an income standpoint, you have to fight with the other 80% of men to get someone from the bottom 20% of women. And that obviously is not true. But these people that feel like, most men can't compete, most men don't get women, they find each other online. They reinforce these views, and someone that's lonely, someone that feels like an outcast, if you find other people that feel like that and you find community in that, you can really radicalize yourself. And they believe that changing of gender roles and expectations has empowered this because women have become more independent and women are pickier about the men. So the women are holding themselves out for that top 20% of men. And, it's just stuff that's not necessarily true that has radicalized this group of people to the point where they're really thinking that they can't, that a normal average man cannot be and we're saying, what does average even mean? Whatever that means to you, average looking, whatever average job can't get a normal person or a person that's above normal, however you look at it. These things are possible. They happen in real life. And honestly, quite often, there's, everybody's seen, and of course, I'm just speaking about like heterosexual relationships, but everybody's seen a guy that is with a girl and people are like, how did he get with that person? And it doesn't always mean that they're rich. And honestly, most times, more often than not, in real life, if you actually deal with people and see people in real life, they're not rich. Some people just don't care about how much, to an extent, we don't have to get in, this isn't a dating episode, but to an extent, some people just don't care about things as long as that person makes them feel happy. Of course, there's always going to be people that live outside of those rules. But when you get how you view the world from Twitter and Reddit threads, you're going to look at the world a specific way than you would if you just went outside and dealt with people in real life. And that's really what it comes down to. The reason that I'm talking about this in particular is that there's obviously danger and consequences when talking about incel culture, right? There's a series of incel-related violence, and I'll post with this episode a link to all the different crimes done against people by incels. But one of the most damning things is how you see people treat each other online. So these same men that feel like women are being picky and, the average woman is saving herself for, the top 20% of men. But then these same people, a girl that's conventionally pretty online posts a picture of herself, you'll have an army of men going mid, or post your OnlyFans. And again, this is people that the internet has ruined their way of talking to people, because in real life, no one talks to a woman like that. You might see someone say that on Twitter, but these people they really believe this is how you interact with people. And then they think that women don't want to interact with them because they're, they're not rich or they're not 6'5" or something like that. But in reality, dude, you just don't know how to talk to a woman. That's really what it comes down to. The constant online harassment, the constant reduction of, and this is not an anti-OnlyFans, anti-sex work podcast or anything like that, but treating women that don't engage in OnlyFans, that don't engage in, I guess, internet pornography, and soliciting them for those things, DMing people, asking if they have a OnlyFans when there's no evidence, no link in bio, nothing like that. That is really offensive to some people, and that's just not how you that's just not how you talk to people, and you wonder why people are so repulsed by you. So again, I'm not trying to victim shame incels into, I'm not trying to shame them into getting their act together, but this is more of like a safe space reflection. Like, have you ever thought that you can't just ask someone for nudes because you think they're pretty? You can't just ask someone for their OnlyFans because you think they're pretty. That's just not how the world works. But you conflate internet culture with how you actually deal with people that you might want to meet off the internet, and it pushes them away. So the online harassment, treating women in particular like they're not people, that they're objects that you are entitled to receive sexual benefit from, that all of this is extremely dangerous to society. And Yeah, so all of these things that are championed, like incels, so they look up to people that are not them. Like for example, Andrew Tate's very popular with incels, and he encourages treating women like garbage. He encourages, if you have emotions for a woman, it's actually kind of gay because having feelings is feminine. Like things like that it's just the ridiculousness around the community that is going to be the downfall of the people in that community, of the loneliness, the anger. Instead of finding the healthy outlets, they find other people that feel that same way, and that just leads to dangerous and violence against people, to the point where people have lost their lives. And again, there's a link in the bio of like different crimes that have been committed by people with this type of ideology. So what do we do to combat this? How do we start having healthier conversations about this? Because honestly, our country is having a more conservative shift, and this is empowering to an extent some incel ideology, because with some of the conservative shifts, there's some loose beliefs, or maybe not so loose depending on how you look at it, that the feminist movement is moving too fast and it's actually hurting women, and that indirectly empowers incel ideology, because incels essentially are declaring a war on feminism. So how do we easily dismiss some of these things? So we talk about, feminism making women too powerful, but last time I checked, women are half the population, right? They don't even remotely hold half the wealth. They don't hold remotely half the positions of power. So like sometimes you just have to step back and remove your emotion from it and just look at the facts. So being lonely, being angry, these are emotions that are legitimate and valid, but deciding to declare war on an entire group of people because of it are where it becomes very invalid. So maybe instead of finding other people that promote violence, that promote animosity towards women, how about you truly reflect and think about what's wrong? Why are you not having success in the way that you want? And maybe ask a woman, maybe talk to them instead of demanding, instead of feeling entitled to them. Ask them why you're not seen in that light. And maybe maybe it might be a gut punch. It might be answers that you're not ready for. Maybe it is easier to blame society and the world versus looking in the mirror. But preventing yourself from further radicalizing, isolating, being lonely, and finding other people that have maybe just as dangerous mindsets, that might save you from a world of trouble later on in your life. And I say a lot of that to say this, because of course there's going to be people that you're not, that aren't going to be interested in you based on how you look, based on how much money you make. But the point of this is to talk about how letting that radicalize you into being a group of people that hate women, that hate happy relationships, that's gone way too far. And that's detrimental to society. It's detrimental to people's mental and physical health. And it ends up in violence that's just never acceptable, to be so radicalized that you just carry out violence against people simply that have never done anything wrong to you, but they represent something that you hate simply for being born a specific gender. Specifically, people that are attractive that you've never met, you just think they will hate you because they're attractive. And these are the things that have happened. There's been mass shootings, there's been stalkings, there's been mass casualty events in different countries just because people simply think that there's some collective push by women to not be with the average man, that all women need to shoot for the top 20% of people. They're using that to explain the birth rate slowing down. They're using that to explain men's mental health generally going down. And I think this all starts from echo chambers online. And as much as I think their internet's fun, I'm old enough to remember a time where I had to socialize with people without the internet. And that allows me to realize that outside of these internet walls, there's a whole world out there where people don't care about, sticking to Twitter guidelines for dating. And I think once the incel community is reminded that and remembers that, the vast majority of the men in that group can be happy. But maybe it takes, the average man to stop thinking that they're entitled to the supermodel You're not entitled to any person. And once that simple thought can get through your head, maybe you'll be on the road to happiness. All right, that's all I've got for today. Is a shorter episode, but again, thanks for hanging with me, listening to me rant about this rise in incel ideology. Again, this is Dre from A Day with Dre, and if you want to support the podcast, again, subscribe. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, anywhere you find your podcasts, please subscribe. Also, TikTok, Instagram, you'll find shorts. Any support is appreciated and welcomed. Peace.